And I particularly do a lot of stuff around transitional safeguarding, which is about spanning the boundary between children's and adult safeguarding. I'm going to talk a lot about teenagers, but I'm not going to just only focus on sort of spanning the boundary across children's and adult safeguarding. I'll be touching on some other boundaries that need spanning, and one of the reasons why I was so excited to be asked to talk to you is because Imagine This, your collective, is very much, it seems to be, in the space of trying to span a number of these boundaries in your work. So hopefully, at least some of the messages I share will resonate with what you do here. So the boundary that gets perhaps least attention at the moment in relation to safeguarding is the boundary between safeguarding and criminal justice. And when we think about particularly our young people and issues of extra-familial harm, so sexual and criminal exploitation, for example, it's really important we think about that permeable boundary between safeguarding and criminal justice. It's not always well attended to, as I say. We're going to think a little bit about the disjunct between concepts of well-being and welfare. You'll be aware, of course, that the paramount principle in children's safeguarding is welfare. In adult safeguarding, the paramount principle within the Care Act is well-being, of which welfare is just one part, which I find interesting to reflect on. I think there's interesting divisions which people like yourselves are striving to kind of kick around in, about the public and voluntary sector. It needn't be quite so fractured as it is, but sometimes it can feel quite fractured. It can be particularly difficult. I know that commissioners in particular are working really hard to try and make that a much more collaborative, collective endeavour rather than the kind of old-fashioned 90s procurement, so thinking much more coherently around that. The boundary around protection and participation, which sometimes feel as if they're pulling in different directions, but we would argue are two sides of the same coin, inextricably linked and mutually interdependent. And for voluntary sector organisations in particular, you have an ability to work at the interface around protection and participation in a way that colleagues in statutory services can sometimes struggle with. They can feel much more constrained in their roles. We're going to talk a little bit about the professionals and the people being supported, because we're not distinct species, and yet sometimes to read some of our policy documentation, listen to the rhetoric, you'd think we had different DNA. I don't think I'm a service user when I go to my GP. What? This is sort of nonsense othering language, and it seeks to really to protect us from the uncomfortable reality that awful stuff can happen to anyone, and that we are no different to those we serve. Sometimes we are indeed ourselves service users, and those we serve also have expertise which far outstrips our professional knowledge sometimes. So think about how we span that boundary more effectively as well. And inherent in all that I'm talking about is trying to blur the boundary between research and practice. Both sources of knowledge are incredibly important, and we would say there's a third source of knowledge that's really important, which is the voice of lived experience. So in RIP, in research and practice, when we talk about evidence-informed practice, we explicitly mean the triangulation of robust, relevant research. But the second source of knowledge that's really important is practice wisdom, tacit knowledge, or sometimes we call it the stuff that you know because you're brilliant at your jobs. Not the stuff you know because you've been doing the job 30 years, because we can learn the wrong stuff on the job, but good quality, critically thought through practice wisdom. And thirdly, crucially, the voice of lived experience. The what works agenda, which is gaining increasing kind of prominence, can sometimes be a little narrow. It's really important we think about what matters, not only what works. And we can only do that by drawing on practice wisdom and people's lived experience as well. And we want to really try and get away from this idea of us and them, or the kind of the notion that these are separate planets, separate systems, and really try and get into the mess in between, which is where your roles, I think, have huge value. Why do we think we need to do something different for teenagers? Why do we need to safeguard teenagers a bit differently to the way we have been doing it for so many years? Well, we think the case for change is pretty self-evident, and it's all stuff you know. You will absolutely be familiar with these messages. Adolescents have distinct safeguarding needs. They are much more likely than younger children to experience extra-familial harm, so harm in their communities, harm in their peer groups, harm in their schools, harm in their colleges. They experience harm in the online world. We know that the drivers for harm, extra-familial harm, and indeed their routes to protection are often contextual. Now, there's a whole body of work called Contextual Safeguarding, and I'm going to give you a link later. I think it's one of the most exciting innovations happening in children's safeguarding today. It's led by Dr. Carleen Firmin at Bedfordshire, and she's really encouraging us to think about that extra-familial contextual harm. This second bullet point is so obvious, I feel embarrassed that I keep putting it on slides. But until we've changed the world, we're going to keep putting it on slides, if that's all right with you. Harm doesn't stop at 18. The effects of harm don't stop at 18, and yet our services very often do stop at 18, and it is the most extraordinary dissonance to acknowledge that, but we can't unsee it. We can't unsee the complete lack of transitional thinking in our safeguarding practice. Speaking of transitions, we need to rehumanise the word transition. Transition means change. We all undergo change in our lives, and change can be difficult. Transition doesn't just mean that sort of service land language. So transition, we need to rehumanise the language. If I asked you to tell me what a significant, a really significant life change or transition that you'd undergone, you would probably say stuff like, first time you fell in love, first time you fell out of love, first time you got a proper job. I hope you all think you've got a proper job now, you definitely have. First time you moved out, or maybe it might be the only time you moved out of home, these sorts of things. First time you became a parent, first time you knew that you weren't going to become a parent. It would be these sorts of life changes. For me, I grew up in rural Wales. One of my big milestones was being allowed to get the bus into town on my own. If you're a townie, that will make no sense to you, but I think I've got some rural crew in the room. That was a big deal, a huge, huge life transition for me. It's very unlikely that any of you would say, my most significant life transition was when my key worker stopped having a .gov email address and moved to a .nhs email address. Transition is not service language, and yet that's how we use it all the time about kids and adults that we support. When we go through change or transition, we're likely to need a bit of extra care and support. That's also true for positive change, by the way. Change is hard, even good change. Apparently divorce rates are exponentially higher amongst lottery winners. Positive change can also bring some challenge to us. When we go through change, we need a bit of extra care and support, even if we don't have care and support needs with a capital C and a capital S, as set out in the Care Act and Adult Safeguarding policy documentation. We kind of need to get a lot better, particularly when I work with teenagers, in not just doing the rescue stuff, which globally we are very good at. We can have a whole different debate about whether rescue mentality is a helpful one. It's not. It's certainly a pervasive mentality. What we're not always so good at is promoting resilience in the young people that we serve. We do quite a good job globally of protecting them, but we can really struggle in the current system to prepare them for adulthood. And we would argue that the system goal needs to be both, to protect and to prepare. We're increasingly good at that on the adult side, actually. There's much more focus around resilience. You will get these slides afterwards, by the way, folks, so don't worry too much about trying to copy bits down. And we need to have a system which is much more developmental in its perspective, that really engages what we know about the adolescent brain, social trends, and how we develop over time. We reckon that there are moral and economic drivers for reimagining the whole system for how we safeguard our teenagers and young adults to one which is explicitly contextual, transitional, and relational. And I'm going to harp on a bit about that in a moment. But I do want to really emphasise, particularly for some senior folk in the room who will be no doubt embroiled in systems thinking in their day jobs all the time, this is not a practice issue, this is not training. When we talk about adolescent safeguarding and transforming the system and so on and so forth, that is not just about practice or telling practitioners to do more or different or better. It's about recognising the whole system needs to adapt. And when we think about adolescent safeguarding in particular as a system, it can be quite helpful to interrogate it, how well it functions as a system. If you're a systems nerd, and I definitely think the word nerd is a compliment, you might be familiar with the work of Friedrich Wester. He was a German systems scientist, did a lot of stuff on this, and another German colleague called Dietrich Dorner took Wester's work and came up with these 7 questions that we could ask of a system. Now, we could ask it of any system. We could ask it of Imagine This as a collective. We could ask it of the whole of Torbay. If we think about the adolescent safeguarding system and we ask these questions of it, I think it gives us pause for thought. Have we defined our goals correctly to optimise it? If you ask people what's the goal of the child protection system, they will inevitably say, very often, to protect children, which is grand, it's not wrong, but where's that bit about preparing? We have to be protecting and preparing our teenagers because we will walk away from them at some point. We will, of course. And we need to have a bit of humility about what we're actually building their resilience for after we've walked away from their lives. So the system goal can sometimes be a bit out of kilter. Have we got joined up systems analysis, paying attention to dynamics, or do we get lost in static data? We love a bit of static data. If you are currently completing your returns for your funder, you will be drowning in static data. But we miss things with that. A good example was in recent years, there's a lot of attention paid to children going missing from care. Rightly, there's a big concern. And so lots and lots of local areas were asked to report and record and report on missing incidents. And so they, in turn, of course, asked their voluntary sector providers to document and record and report missing from care incidents. Meanwhile, the people who are ensnaring our kids in going missing from care very quickly adapted because they're a bit more nimble than us, a bit more innovative than us. The people who want to hurt our kids are inevitably more innovative and agile than we are, sadly. They appear to invest rather more in research and development than we're capable of doing, frankly. So whilst we were all running around rag rating and scoring and doing static spreadsheets on missing from care incidents, there was adaptation. So we have some parts of the country, I don't know if it's true of Torbay, but in some parts of the country, particularly in urban areas, there were organised groups and gangs who were providing young people with fully branded paper round bags, you know, the big orange high-vis ones with a tabloid logo on them. And those kids were delivering drugs, selling drugs before school with their bags going around their communities, popping in for registration, being marked as present on the register, then nipping back out again, then coming back for afternoon registration, and then coming home again, and being ticked in as present in their children's home or their foster carers were reporting them as not missing. But they were absolutely missing in any true sense of the word. But we'd lost that because we were so focused on static data. Does that make sense? And there'll be a million other examples you could think of where we do that. Are we creating irreversible emphasis? We might be. There's a possibility that in our focus on youth knife crime, we're rather missing the fact that 18 to 25-year-olds are far more vulnerable, the data would show. That's not at all to say that the emphasis on youth knife crime isn't important. It is. But we need to be thinking about where our searchlight goes and what that means for our practice and our leadership. Are we paying enough attention to the potential side effects of our actions? I think this is a real challenge. I'm going to talk a little bit later about things like the use of secure placements for young people, where we send them because we've run out of options and we're at our wit's end and we feel scared and worried, and all that stuff is true and understandable. And then we send these kids to often Snowdonia, in my experience, very, very expensive placements, 5-to-1 supervision, 15 grand a week. You know. Are we healing them? What do we do with them in those settings? What do we think we've created there in terms of side effects? Real critical thinking is needed about how we try and solve these really concerning issues. Are we avoiding oversteering or overreacting? I have some views on stop and search. My personal view is there is a real danger that we might be oversteering our attention to particular communities with particular policing practices. Not sure how much of an issue that is in Torbay, but it's certainly an issue nationally. Are we avoiding authoritarian action? No, is the short answer. Knife crime prevention orders, big hot topic in adolescent safeguarding. You can absolutely bet your life that if Lambeth are worried about it now, it's coming to you in the next 18 months, isn't it? Knife crime prevention orders will, in effect, hold young people criminally accountable before they have actually committed a crime. Cool, yeah? Because I thought we still had a rule of law. Like, let's just think critically about some of the measures we're taking as a country here. Oh, and the $64 million question. How can we act with humility and future consciousness, applying foresight and transformative innovation in the face of the unpredictability and uncontrollability of complex dynamic systems? If you've got an answer to that, bottle it and sell it. But make no mistake, that is really the question you are trying to answer in your practice, in your leadership, in your system design. And there's a wee blog there if you want to get proper geeky about systems thinking. So I wanted to start with that because it's really important we see the whole system and we don't just focus on or even penalise individual practitioners for what they do Monday to Friday, Monday to Saturday. And before I get too highfalutin with my systems thinking research, I quite like this quote because it brings me back down to earth a bit. It's a quote from Bronfenbrenner, which some of you will definitely know, given your roles. So Bronfenbrenner was the king of the ecological perspective. It was the idea that we all exist in systems. We have micro and meso and macro systems, and they like little onion rings that make us who we are. And Bronfenbrenner says, to develop normally, a child requires progressively more complex joint activity with one or more adults who has an irrational, emotional relationship with the child. Or in layperson's terms, someone's got to be crazy about the kid. That's number one. First, last, always. Someone's got to be crazy about the kid. It is nothing short of an act of love. To do the work that you do well is nothing short of an act of love. Some of you will identify as being that person. Some of you will feel that you are the only person who's proper crazy about this kid right now. We need to name that. Now, we're not saying that's a good solution. If you are over-identifying with that quote, you need to take that to your manager, talk to your peers, process it. We don't want heroes. It is not our job to make the young people we serve think that only we can ever care for them. But let's at least name it. Let's be honest about the emotional endeavour of doing the work that you do. You know, some of you will have woke up this morning, the first kid you worried about is not your own. And some of you will go to bed tonight and the last kid you think about is not related to you. We need to name that. Not collude with it and say it's okay, because our job, if we think we are that person, our job is to work out our exit strategy. Sharpish. The voluntary sector are absolutely key here, because you do have, to some extent, depending on how commissioners are engaging with you, more flexibility to think in that fluid way, to think about, well, if I'm crazy about you now, what am I going to do to help other people be absolutely crazy? Forgive the use of the word crazy, by the way. It was the 70s, and as we keep being told, things were different. But let's be honest about the fact that for some of you, you are the person who's utterly, utterly crazy about this kid, and we need to help you find other people who can be. Make sense? We don't talk enough about love in our sector. And I would, it's not for me to improve on the work of Bronfenbrenner, but I would respectfully suggest that's as true for adults as it is for children. We all need someone, at least one person, who is utterly, unequivocally in our corner. We all need crew, basically. But the difference is that my crew don't get accused of antisocial behaviour. I don't know why, frankly, because they should. But my crew drink Blossom Hill and wear kitten heels, so that's socially acceptable. They don't put their hoods up, because it would ruin their hair. So if we were to design this system then, if you were to redesign your local system, it might look a bit like this. You will improve on it, I'm sure. This is not a model, by the way. I find the word model a bit problematic. Model implies that there's been a research program in Minnesota and it's been proven to be effective, and then we pay a lot of money for a license and we roll it out across Paignton, and then the magic happens. And when it doesn't, we can blame the staff. So the word model has some problems. This is a framework for thinking, and it's just a start for 10. You can absolutely improve on it and augment it, I know. We would suggest, if we were to redesign a system for safeguarding our adolescents, knowing what we now know, and drawing on your practice wisdom, might look a bit like this. It would be evidence-informed. I would say that, wouldn't I? I'm a bit biased. I tend to think it's quite a good idea to do more stuff that looks like it might work for some people based on current available evidence with a fair wind. That's all evidence is ever promising you, by the way. It's not really promising you what works. It's what might work for some people based on best available evidence in the current context with a fair wind. It's not quite as sexy, I realise, as a title. These kind of three pillars, if you like, of the system, it would be contextual, or you could say ecological. It would absolutely recognise that kids' routes to harm and their routes to protection are often outside of the family. They are within their communities and the contexts and spaces they engage in. So Carleen Furman's work, there's a link at the bottom there. I'm not on commission, it's free. She is a mate, full disclosure, but her work's fantastic. And if you click on that link, you can join the Contextual Safeguarding Network, and there's loads of tools and resources. Carleen and her team have been helping local authorities around the country try and engage in this kind of contextual thinking. And I guess, how can I put it simply? If you've had 6 sexual assaults in a stairwell of a particular block of flats, rather than having 6 individual meetings about 6 individual young people and 6 different plans and 6 different workers, we need a strategy meeting about the stairwell. Well, if you've shut a lot of your youth centres and McDonald's are still doing free Wi-Fi, your kids are definitely in McDonald's, so we might need McDonald's round our safeguarding subgroup table. It's that sort of expansive thinking where the system goal is not just how do I keep this kid safe, it's how do I enable the places and spaces and context that kids engage in to be safe. That's sort of contextual safeguarding in a really, really succinct nutshell, but do engage in the wider literature. It's really, really interesting. It demands a place-based approach, and the voluntary sector are absolutely crucial to the notion of contextual safeguarding, so I'd really encourage you to read up on it. Secondly, this system would be transitional, or you could say developmental. The point would be that it would take a deliberately developmental perspective, like we do in early years. Because it wasn't that long ago that we redesigned the early years system to be much more meaningfully rooted in everything we know about infant development and infant attachment. We've never done that with teenagers. We sort of treat them as if they're just taller, spottier 7-year-olds or grumpier, spottier grown-ups. We don't actually have a system which is developmentally designed for them and their unique strengths and needs and all the glory that that life stage brings. It would demand that we offer more fluidity over time because harm doesn't stop at 18. We have to get rid of that kind of static binary notion. And it would really push us to realign systems. It would mean things like children's safeguarding partnerships and adult safeguarding boards, not even singing from the same hymn sheet, but having the same definition of singing. That would be a start. It would involve commissioners explicitly inviting providers to think about lifespan work. thinking, what can we do to disrupt the binary notion? Well, actually, our community-based providers are key to disrupting that binary notion. So really pushing for some fluidity. Thirdly, this system would be relational, properly person-centered, where the system was as good at caring about people as you are as individuals. Where relationships are not just a vehicle for an intervention, they are the intervention as well, very often. Where we're focusing not just on caring for, but on capacity building, so that when we walk away, because we will, we leave a legacy and not a gap. Yeah? It also involves being trauma-attuned. Part of being relational is that we understand a person, we are all of us, the sum of our experiences and environments. Yeah, a bit of genes, different debate. Thinking about being trauma-attuned means that we have to see the person behind the behaviour, engage with their experiences and their environments as part of our understanding of them. This is a warning in case anyone spent the last 2 years carefully designing an ACEs checklist. I will just highlight to you. In a moment, I'm going to invite us to think critically about ACEs, because being trauma-attuned neither begins nor ends with filling in an ACEs checklist. Importantly, this new design system would pay much better attention to issues of equalities, diversity and inclusion. We haven't done a very good job on that, if we're honest. Equalities, diversity and inclusion, we have failed to engage with it properly. Let's just look at what we've done around safeguarding teenagers in the last decade or so. We are still presiding over a system where boys are under-identified as victims of sexual harm. And yes, there's a bit of media stuff and masculinity, but it's also on us. The tools we use to assess are full of gendered blind spots. If I see another CSE group being advertised child sexual exploitation group being advertised in pink font, so help me God, Accessibility doesn't just mean we run that service near the bus route and there's a ramp. It means we've made it look accessible to the people we think we need to reach. I was in a local authority area recently where they were so proud that they had a sexual exploitation group, but they disguised it as a nail care group. Well, that's fantastic for some of the young people who live in your local area, and not even just the girls. Not all girls care about their nails, but it was that sort of well-intentioned but really narrow understanding of how equalities and diversity plays out in our service offer. So we have a real issue around male vulnerability not being identified. We have a huge issue actually around things like learning difficulties and disabilities. We know that young people and young adults with learning difficulties and disabilities are overrepresented as both victims and perpetrators of sexual and criminal exploitation. And yet we're still debating whether issues of consent should be engaged within RSE in special schools. So what? They're engaging with issues of consent. They're learning about it from the people we don't want to teach them. We have to contend more meaningfully with issues of diversity. And in terms of ethnicity, my God, we've got some way to go. We know from youth justice data, Charlie Taylor did a big review of the youth justice system a couple of years ago, the disproportionality in our youth justice system around race and ethnicity is shocking. Absolutely shocking. And we will find what we keep looking for. If we keep increasing stop and search in particular communities, we're going to find more black boys who are friends with someone who carries a knife. And before you know it, their names are on a database being shared with the National Crime Agency. In this country, University of Cambridge research showed you are 11 times more likely to be charged under joint enterprise as a black man. I'm not a lawyer, caveat, but joint enterprise is a legal doctrine which basically says Joanna was nowhere near the scene of the crime. In fact, she was actually down in Surrey, but we know she's mates with Dez, and Dez done it, so we've got Joanna banged to rights. I'm slightly simplifying the legal doctrine there, but that is, in essence, what joint enterprise means. 11 times more likely as a black man. Wow. We've got some real issues around ethnicity and race. And it really plays out in our work to safeguard teenagers, particularly in urbanised areas. We need to think really critically and carefully, because at the very, very least, we should be aiming to do no harm, right? And also this new system, running through it like a sticker rock, it would be participative. Explicitly, deliberately, in public, on purpose, every single day, participative. As much voice and choice as we can possibly inject into the system. Treating young people as they are, experts in their own lives. And that's easy to say, isn't it? Sort of nothing about you without you. I promise I won't quote Jeremy Hunt again this morning. But, it's a nice adage, nothing about you without you. But actually, however participative we pride ourselves on being with young people, when it comes to safeguarding, we get anxious, we get worried, and we lose a lot of that participative imperative because welfare first. And we need to think about rebalancing that. That boundary between participation and protection needs to be better understood. So that might be a way to think about designing a system from scratch. Just pause for a second, because I'm getting bored of my own voice. What would you improve on that? For Torbay, what would your local system, what would you want it to include?
So spirited life, heartfelt engagement, dreaming, creativity, that kind of stuff.
Yep. Yep. And you've got a real opportunity, given the organisations that are part of Imagine This Collective.
I've got imagination in there, but all work,
Yes. Yes. Proper aspiration and imagination. Yes.
Yeah, a whole community.
Yes, absolutely right, because the system, and I'll talk about this later, the system does not mean services, and services sure as hell don't mean statutory. Proper community level. Yeah. Yes, absolutely right. If we're not wondering, what are we here for? Because then the robots really will take our jobs. They can have mine. Any more for any more?
I think I was very inspired by hearing the woman who worked on knife crime in Glasgow, and that one of the key things there was you have to give alternatives. And I also think something that it's a long time since I've been in practice, but one of the things that seems to me, reflecting, is important, is that people are rational, that professionals can see themselves as being the guardians of rationality. What you need to do is get these irrational young people to see what rational behaviour is. And actually, it's that recognition that I think that people do act rationally, because they're often in an irrational place, and it's about respecting them, that they have goals which they are pursuing, which are perhaps, in their context, a rational, sensible thing to do. And
Absolutely.
It's how to kind of recognise that when you're working with people. So I'm sorry if that sounds a bit...
No, not at all. That's really, really well put, and it speaks very, very closely to the research. You're absolutely right. We attribute irrationality to young people when it suits us. Why would you possibly put yourself in that situation without recognising they often have a very rational logic model? And we also over-attribute rationality to ourselves. Well, of course, we are grown-ups and professionals, and we're terribly sensible. We never do irrational, ridiculous things, and we do. And it's a good example of how we seek to other. There's the professionals and the people we serve, and we are different somehow. Yeah, that's a really good point.
I think having realistic expectations of our young people. So I work with young people in long-term foster and residential care, and I think we often expect our young people to do things that no other young people their age are expected to do. So I'm working with them where they are. And then the other thing I was thinking was, people that know me will smile when I say this, but embracing challenge. So rather than stamping on challenge and trying to do things in a way that people far higher than me think is the best way to do it, embracing challenge, because that often brings positive change.
Yes, and that would really speak to the curiosity point as well. We're not just curious about kids' lives, we're curious about our own betterment, our own services, our systems are offer, and we are resilient enough that challenge is welcome. Now, don't get me wrong, not every time a kid questions your decision is going to feel welcome, and I don't expect it to, But a system which allows and invites challenge, because that's part of how it improves. So I completely agree. And your point about we expect more of some of those kids than we do of our own, I think is very, very well made. We pathologise young people. I'm going to come back to that in a moment. Hi.
Identity and purpose. Identity and purpose.
Give me a bit more.
Well, the importance of recognising that they're... that it's not our identity or the system's identity that's being projected onto them. That they
properly person-centred, which really engages with issues of nuanced identity.
And establishing their own sense of purpose through their own awareness of their identity.
And I guess that also then speaks to imagination. We want to be imaginative, but we want young people to also be given the space to imagine their future and to honour their aspirations. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me.
I think amongst the transitional development, when we look at our systems, obviously, there's a lot of response to what they do physically with their lives and their physical actions. I think the relation pays homage to be able to enable young people to find more diplomatic solutions. And if we respond more to diplomatic solutions or talking things through or rather than their physical actions, that can really help to build upon their transition development into adulthood.
I think that's right. So we're both working with them in a way that does that kind of preparatory capacity building, but we're also not only judging young people on the physical presenting behaviours that worry us, because that can become completely eclipsing.
To respond an awful lot to sort of what they do.
Yeah. We act on stuff we see, and we see the stuff we look for, and we look for the stuff that gets measured, I would suggest.
I'm a yacht bus manager, so
Your bread and butter.
we work with traumatised families, not just traumatised children, and obviously in our assessment we not just their trauma, their family trauma,
Yes.
and the trauma in the community as well.
Absolutely right.
Areas of deprivation, access to education, access to, and being excluded from your own community.
Yes.
Because although the voluntary sector is an amazing sector, it's very hard to reach services from children.
Yes.
Quite hard to reach services, but they for these young people and their families to access.
Yeah. And I think you're absolutely right about thinking whole. It's a think family. It became a policy agenda rather than an act. And I worry sometimes that in our well-intentioned efforts to be more child-centred in recent decades, we've rather lost the point that children tend to exist in families and communities. So voice of the child doesn't mean we ignore mum. You know? And sometimes we can be a bit polarised, and we do forget to think about whole systems, and particularly the family system, which is incredibly influential. And you're absolutely right about whole community trauma. In relation, I mean, Glasgow have done a lot of work on this, haven't they? That we think about trauma across communities and across generations, not simply, I've done a checklist on this kid. So really thinking expansively.
Ability for the young person to recognise what does mean positive choices and what does mean non-positive choices, and ability to be able to make positive choices. For that purpose, it's like, it have to be done huge support and work, not only from the family, but from, it's like all agencies who are involved, and even like, when we're talking about community-based, we have very little here, places where young people can turn up, like you were saying, McDonald's. It's all around why McDonald's gets all this messy, because that their community, that's where they're hanging around. And also, as a saying, which is really worrying, that gang-related like identity is getting very popular now.
Of course.
And young people wanting to be related to them now.
Which I think speaks beautifully to making them a better offer. That came up before. And we are going to talk about choices. It's a really complex notion, and we use the word very, very freely, and I'm going to suggest that we actually need to be much more careful in our use of the word choice. Did you have a point you wanted to make?
I just want to say that we're under a place-based approach. I think it's also about, as you say, about meeting young people online as well. So providing services, going to them where they are, so using social media, using the cyber world to support them and provide interventions where they are, rather than expecting them to come to us.
Yes, and that then leads us to think about the huge learning and development implications, because we are not a very digitally literate sector. You will have noticed. There was just this week actually, there was an example of a local authority in the Midlands working through their schools, and they sent out loads of posters. I can't even remember the name of the platforms and apps, but a whole list of like, if you find these things on your kid's computer, they could be into hacking. And they'd put the National Crime Agency logo on it and the West Mercia Police. Within 3 hours, having had it reported, the National Crime Agency had to come out and say, sorry, please don't use our logo. That is nonsense. If you find those things on your child's computer, they might be learning to code, which makes them more employable. Can you stop this, please? It was just a really good insight. Well-intended, really well-intended professional intervention, but we frankly don't know what the bloody hell we're talking about. It's a bit like legal highs. Is there anything less credible than a 55-year-old trying to use the numbers and letters, drugs names that we don't really know? Like, we just need to be a bit humble. There's huge learning development needs across our sector if we're going to really engage meaningfully with complex contemporary adolescent risk.
But then use our young people to teach us.
Bingo.
Just to say from a commissioning perspective, there's got to be a little bit more risk about how we safely hold services, because the thing is, those are the things you need to know about. If we're listening to young people, how do we translate that through to when we've got senior audiences who are public capital money, and that's determined important context. But you need to have a commissioning process that somehow asks those questions and doesn't focus and drive all the activities with the numbers.
Absolutely
and
right.
that is quite a high level of risk.
Yes.
Actually, when you try to push something like that through, actually that
kind of like, we're doing all of this and we haven't seen that bit because we've got a culture that does that.
Yeah.
So going through that, that's the relationship bit that you have to do internally. It's not just relationships, it's not just an outward facing thing, it's internal as well.
Yeah, I think that makes really good sense. And it absolutely speaks to kind of the boundary spanning stuff here. We have to do both and, not either or. Both the KPIs and performance measures and research around what might work best and what young people tell us they need and want to engage in. Both being alert to risk and being able to engage in risk in a way that allows us to be innovative. All that kind of stuff. So, having said blithely, let's make the system evidence-informed, I am duty-bound to offer a bit of critical thinking here, because the trouble with evidence is much like teenagers, it tends to evolve over time, inconveniently for us. And sometimes, in our sector, we're a bit guilty of talking about being evidence-informed as if it's a static thing. I read a journal article in 1992, and therefore I am now evidence-informed. We wouldn't accept our GP or our dental nurse saying, yeah, I read a paper back in the 80s, I reckon I'm good to go. And yet, in our sector, we accept that a great deal for children, young people, and families, actually. We don't really set ourselves the same high standards around using research evidence as we would expect from the professionals that serve us. And what does that say about our professional pride? What does it say about the kids and adults and communities we serve? What, we think they don't deserve any better than a bit of common sense? Of course they do. Your job's incredibly complex and absolutely requires us to use evidence. Thinking about how evidence evolves, I've particularly looked here at the sexual exploitation evidence because it's a bit more advanced than things like criminal exploitation, which is very, very emerging. And just a couple of examples of how inconveniently the evidence has moved on just in the last few years. CSE risk assessment toolkits and checklists is a really good example of where we meant to do well, but we got a little bit lost, she says diplomatically. There was an absolute proliferation of CSE risk assessment checklists in recent years. The CSE industry, and I'm afraid I do use that word deliberately, led to this sort of almost swamping of the sector with checklists. Now, you might be familiar with some of these. They're, many of them very well intentioned and often based on best available evidence at the time. But that evidence tended to come from who's in our services. So if we've set up a service in the 90s and we mainly have white working class teenage girls as part of it, and we then develop tools and practices based on the cohort we're supporting, we shouldn't then be surprised when in the noughties our tools are extremely ethno and gender centric. Kind of figures. You'll be familiar with some of these tools. Some of them are so general as to be a nonsense. Score 5 for every yes. Mood swings. Keeping secrets. Well, I hope so. She's 15. I mean, we'd be terribly alarmed if there wasn't a little bit of mood swings and keeping secrets, wouldn't we? Some of them are so specific as to be downright dangerous, in my view. Score 2 for every yes. Multiple unwanted pregnancies. Multiple older boyfriends. Unexplained jewellery and makeup. Revealing, even provocative clothing. Oh no, Chooks isn't presenting with any of those risk indicators, so I guess Chooks must not be at risk. I'm only slightly paraphrasing. So the tools we use when they're not well evidence-based can actually drive the blind spots and pitfalls that you're trying to navigate your way through. Professor Sarah Brown at Coventry University did 2 very interesting studies in 2016 and 2017, in which she looked at the use of these scored CSE checklists, and she highlighted a number of problems. Number 1, stop calling them indicators. There are only 3 well-evidenced indicators, or with any kind of predictive value of sexual exploitation. You probably know what they are instinctively. Previous sexual victimization, being in care, being disabled. Going missing is something to worry about in its own right. It may or may not be an indicator of CSE. You might be going missing to run away from the abuse you're suffering. We've got to think critically, And also, let's just worry because they're going missing. That's common sense, right? So be a bit critical. She also highlighted the inconsistency around how we score. Your 5 versus my 5 will be different. My 5 on a Monday is different to my 5 on a Friday, all that kind of stuff. And then the issues of asking staff to use these tools with half a day's training, or worse still, 30 minutes e-learning training. Would we want anyone digging around in our kids' lives on that basis? Let's be a bit humble here. Unfortunately, we're about to do all the same mistake all over again in relation to criminal exploitation if we're not careful. Stay alert, folks. If someone tries to push a scored checklist on you about indicators of knife violence, keep your head, breathe, reflect, think critically, okay? Because there's a lot of that stuff doing the rounds right now, and we need to be careful. Really obvious one, grooming line. I'm sure, like many of us in this room, I certainly sent my staff on grooming line training not so many years ago. I might have even gone on it myself. Whoops, turns out grooming's not linear. We didn't know that. The whole premise of the grooming line, a very, very well-established concept in some quarters, particularly around sexual exploitation, is the idea that there are linear steps, one after the other, with the ultimate goal of contact abuse. Because we didn't understand the internet then, and we now know that for many, many perpetrators of sexual harm, there is no end goal of contact abuse. Doesn't mean we were wrong or stupid or daft or need to feel ashamed. We just need to stay a bit nimble and be open to new evidence and be resilient enough to change our practice and not feel defensive in the face of new evidence. Being evidence-informed is a state of mind, you know, not a journal article. And quite a challenging one here, good relationships in sex education, which is incredibly important. I'm a big fan of it myself. I think sex ed is terrifically important to young people's lives. Oh, and it's enshrined in international law, so always a good reason to offer it, and we should. But we did that thing that we often do in our sector. We panicked, and we meant well, and we did some slightly ill-thought-through things. We made lots of films, particularly around CSE. Some of them are really graphic. You might have seen some of these films. You know, Dez's choices, Dez's story, the one where Dez gets her head stoved in at the end and things like that. Really graphic scenes of rape and murder in some of them. You know, even in saying those words, I'm conscious of being in this space and what that might mean to us. We're showing those films, or we have been showing those films, to whole assemblies full of kids. If a birth parent was found to be showing their children films of that nature, it would give us cause to investigate safeguarding concerns. And yet we call it education. We have police forces around the country. I have no idea whether your local constabulary are involved in this. So this is not a little sly dig at all locally, but nationally, we have police forces proudly reporting X thousands of children have now seen Dez's Risky Choices film. We're not screening for trauma on the way in, we're just showing them to whole assemblies. We're not doing the aftercare. There's a really powerful quote from a young woman being supported by Bernardo's where she said, "That's when I knew I couldn't say anything. When all the kids were laughing at how stupid the girl had been on the film and I thought, oh God, I've been that stupid. That's when I knew I couldn't say anything." We never meant that. That's not what we meant when we did that stuff. But a good example where just a little bit of critical engagement with the evidence would have helped us tread a more careful path. Again, not saying this to make any of us feel ashamed or stupid, but to just highlight how easy it is to fall into doing things which aren't well evidenced and aren't critically thought through. Does that make sense? We want to think about that complexity. You know this because of the work you do. When we talk about young people at risk of harm, well, first off, all young people are at risk of harm. That's the point about risk. It's about potentiality. Actually, just on that language, risk is about the potentiality of harm, the might-happenness of harm. It was not intended to be used in the way we're using it. Medium risk. What's medium risk? She'd only gone missing 6 times, and when she goes missing 10 times, we'll rag rate her red, not amber, and she'll be high risk then. How many times would your daughter have to go missing for you to feel that it was a concern? Right? What do we really mean by medium risk? Low risk. You know, we've kind of distorted our language, and it might be driving a little bit of unhelpful practice if we're not careful. When we're thinking about risk of harm, we've got to contend with all these multiple interacting ecological factors. So childhood experiences matter. You know, there's absolutely no doubt that adversity and trauma and, I hate this word, dysfunction in childhood can indeed exacerbate risk as we become teenagers and adolescents. But don't fall into the trap of thinking this stuff only happens to troubled families. Awful term. Awful, awful, awful stuff happens to lovely children in lovely homes in nice leafy parts of town. You know that. Sometimes it gets missed in our policy documentation if we're not careful. Attachment needs, or what we might call relationships. You know, also a huge factor in how we understand adolescent risk of harm, because we all need crew. You know, and that plays out in all sorts of different ways, good and bad. Neurobiological development, the adolescent brain is not a separate country, but it does have some particular peculiarities to it, which can be interesting to think about. Environmental factors, if they haven't got spaces to be in, if the community they live in are high crime, if there's parts of their locality which are really entrenched in intergenerational poverty, all of these things have a role to play. Peer and wider social influences, good and bad. Just focusing on the bad. Whilst we've all been busy debating whether or not we should or shouldn't include notions of consent in relationships and sex education, and whether academies should or shouldn't be forced to actually teach RSE, our kids are learning about consent from the Ched Evans trial. I'm not a lawyer. I make no comment on the ultimate verdict. What I would respectfully suggest is that we probably don't want our sons to learn about consent from a man who picks up drunk women from the floor of a chip shop. I don't think that's an unreasonable bar to set our boys, actually. They are learning about this stuff from wider social influences if we don't get in there and make them a better offer. So let's think about that. And of course, society's attitude to young people, because I've got a hunch that we don't really like teenagers in this country. I think we do in this room. I can feel the love for teenagers emanating off you. But as a nation, I'm not sure we really like teenagers at all. I think we're quite prejudiced towards teenagers. In fact, I think we have some laws that only apply to teenagers, like knife crime prevention orders, ASBOs in old money as they used to be. We do things which are deeply prejudicial. I read community development strategies or community resilience strategies sometimes, which say things like, communities must feel protected and safe from the antisocial behaviour of young people. But young people are also the community. They're not different to it. Mosquitoes, are you familiar with mosquitoes? Not the little flies. So these are devices. They play a very high-pitched sound that only kids and very young civil servants, I found out amusingly, I know, that was one of my best meetings, that they can hear. And we did it a lot in the sort of late 90s, early noughties. We used to put them up around town, and it would make sure that kids couldn't sit on particular benches that we didn't want them to sit on, or in certain parks, because the sound would be so excruciating, like a dog whistle, in more ways than one. Let's just think about that. They're still using them in some parts of the country. I hope you're not locally, but they still are in some parts of the country. Oh, you are? Oh, fantastic. Smash them up. I mean, don't smash them up. Oh, fantastic. There's a systemic structural solution. Let's imagine they made a mosquito device that emitted a high-pitched sound that only women over a size 12 could hear. And they played it outside high-end fashion shops to keep fatties like me away. Would we be okay with that? No. Why do we think it's okay to try and deter young people and make their experience of their community so unpleasant that they have to find other unseen parts of their community to be in? We need to contend with a societal prejudice towards young people. So that's on us, not just as professionals, but as people, as citizens, as voters, as newspaper purchasers. You know, this is bigger than just what you do Monday to Friday, or Monday to Saturday. And if we think about that in that sort of attitude to young people, this quote from Gwitha Rees and Mike Steen has really stayed with me. They were looking at like adolescent safeguarding and how independent and autonomous and increasingly kind of self-efficacious, or what my man would call know-it-allness of teenagers. And they said it makes them imperfect victims. They were actually making a very important moral point, and they deliberately used quite a provocative term. I think they're right. I think teenagers are imperfect victims in our current system. I think if we're really honest, we like our child victims to look like children and act like victims. About this high, big eyes, cute, grateful. And when they're this high, with a neck tattoo and call us names, it's a rather different emotional ask of our safeguarding colleagues. We saw a really good example of this when they brought the first round of kids over from Calais a couple of years ago. Remember? They had the audacity to be older teenagers. How dare they? Some of them had facial hair. And almost every newspaper responded with, "They're not children, he's got a moustache." Ugh! You know, as if we haven't got young men in our lives, in our personal lives, with a bit of facial hair. We still know they're vulnerable. We still see their needs. And yet, as a nation, we were appalled. We wanted the proper child victims to come over, the cute ones, the nice ones. And it took us, as a nation, to have to see a 3-year-old face down in seawater before we could find our collective compassion. What a damning indictment on our ability to see the vulnerability and needs of teenagers. That's what you're up against, folks. No wonder you're tired some days. That's what you're up against in the work you do. We have to know that. We're working within a child protection system primarily designed to protect littlies from harming their families, and we are globally pretty good at that. We didn't know about tech-enabled gang-associated exploitation when we designed the child protection system. That doesn't mean that professionals are failing young people. In my view, that means professionals are being failed by a poorly designed system. But that's not quite as cool a headline, I suppose, is it? And to be fair, you know, on the adult side, they've got an equally difficult tension there. They're trying to balance the whole kind of respecting an adult's autonomy and their capacity. But also, there's a social imperative to have safe citizens. So colleagues and adults are also walking their own tightrope here. It's tricky stuff. I'm not going to dwell on this too much, but I want to just talk briefly, and colleagues have raised it before, about thinking structurally, environmentally, about the harms young people face, and adults indeed. So we know that structural factors mean we need connected systems. So, fairly obvious stuff. Poverty makes you poorly. Poverty makes you poorly. Being poor makes you. Well, it's quite hard to parent when you're poor. It's incredibly hard to parent when you're poor and poorly. And being poorly is more likely to make you poor. This is not a radical, subversive statement to make. We know unequivocally from the work of Marmot, for example, on health inequalities, that poverty makes you poorly. We know unequivocally that if you are poor, we are much more likely to subject you and your family to safeguarding and child protection intervention. You're 12 times more likely to have your child removed if you live in Blackpool than if you live in Surrey. This is based on the child welfare inequalities research that Paul Bywaters and colleagues have done. So we have to engage with poverty. And if you're working in local government and you've been told that you're not allowed to be activists and you have to be all neutral and apolitical, nonsense. You work with people, the work you do is political. Small p political, granted, but political nonetheless. Never apologise for that. Never apologise for having to think politically and structurally about the stuff you deal with. We must not collude with the idea that poor people are just bad parents. We know that's not true. We know it's more complex. We need to start shouting about it a bit more. We know that poverty is linked to sexual exploitation of adults. We know that sexual exploitation of adults is linked to mental health. We know that modern slavery is linked to homelessness, and that's bidirectional, so one increases the likelihood of the other. We know, for example, that exploitation and trafficking is then connected to poor economic outcomes, and poor economic outcomes is linked to the fact you might get your kids taken off you. All this stuff interconnects like the inside of an expensive watch. We know that adults they're called adults with multiple needs and exclusions in some parts of literature, because that's catchy. We know that, of course, no surprise, their outcomes tend to be poorer, but they're also much more likely to have had really, really tough childhoods. Sure, go figure, right? Given how interconnected all this stuff is, why are we still asking local areas to work in silos? You're in charge of sexual exploitation, and you're our modern slavery lead, and you're the one person who 2 days a week works on poverty. Actually, scrap that, now you do parenting. As if they're not connected. We fragment and silo services, and that stops you from getting into the system stuff, the connectivity of all these issues. Again, commissioning is such a powerful lever here. In Sheffield, they're just about to try and go out to commission an all-age kind of piece of work around domestic abuse, mental health, and criminal and sexual exploitation, cradle to grave. In terms of commissioners saying we are going to lead the system change here by thinking connectedly, I thought it was a great example, quite inspiring. So we need to think structurally and in a connected way. And I keep gently introducing the idea of adults because, and this is a really inconvenient truth, adolescence goes on for much longer than we like to pretend it does. So don't show this to your child. If you've got a 23-and-a-half-year-old kid living with you rent-free, don't show them this slide. It's a really, really good business case for their lifestyle choices right now. So when we look at things like brain development, I'm drawing here on the work of Sawyer and colleagues. They had a cracking paper in The Lancet in 2018. They looked at brain scan imaging and cognitive functioning and affective functioning and emotional and all that type of stuff. And they confront us with a really inconvenient truth. It turns out, folks, that adolescence is not about 11.5 to about 17.5. Adolescence is about 10 to about 24, 25. But we all knew that, really, didn't we? Because we've all got 21, 22, 23, 25-year-olds that we absolutely still care for and support. We have always really known this, but we have colluded with the mythology that childhood and adulthood have nice, neat boundaries, and something magical happens overnight on their 18th birthday. There's a very, very wise professor of social work called Danielle Turney, and she said to me many years ago, and I think about it all the time, transition is a process, not an event. Transition is personalised, it's individualised. You will know some 13-year-old very, very adult people, and you will know some 30-year-old children, and you may indeed be married to a 45-year-old teenager. Some of us are. We have to think much more fluidly. The point about a transitional system is it would allow you to engage with that in the way that you know best. You know your people. You know which young people you can ratchet up more and more independence for, who you can take measured risks with, which young adults actually need much more protection than they're afforded in law. You know your people. You know your patch. We need the system to accommodate that kind of flexibility. Because you've got a really perverse arrangement at the minute. We've got two different planets and they don't talk to each other. We've got the child protection planet, where we protect babies from harming their family. We've got the adult safeguarding planet, which is increasingly brilliant in my view. It's all governed by the Making Safeguarding Personal agenda, rights-based, person-centred. They've got language which we do not use in children's services, like choice and control. It's exciting, isn't it? I mean, outside of youth work, these are not words we hear very much of in children's services, are they? Choice and control. Risk enablement. No, thank you. We do risk assessment and risk management. Thank you very much. What's this risk enablement? What fresh hell is this? You know, completely different way of constructing it. There's a very, very famous judgment that was made in an adult safeguarding case in the Court of Protection, where the judge said he'd basically been asked to intervene to stop two learning disabled adults having a relationship. And he quite rightly said, no, the state is not going to stop you from having a romantic, intimate, or indeed sexual relationship when you are two consenting adults. And he said, famously, what use is it making someone safe if we only make them miserable? Spot on. In the children's world, respectfully, I reckon we're pretty relaxed about making you miserable as long as you're physically safe. Interesting disjunct to think about there. Two examples from legislation about that disjunct. So the Mental Capacity Act, 2005, assumes capacity from the age of 16. You have mental capacity from the age of 16 unless we can prove otherwise. I can get behind that. The statutory definition there for criminal exploitation, almost identical to sexual exploitation definition, they just changed the key words. That says, in effect, doesn't matter if you look like or even think you are consenting, you cannot consent to your exploitation because you are under 18. I can get behind that too. I could argue really passionately for both those positions. What I don't think we can defend is leaving practitioners to navigate those contradictory messages. When the domestic abuse bill gets dragged out the long grass, as I believe it will soon, that's going to kick in at 16. The definition for domestic abuse will be if you are over 16 in an intimate relationship where there is abuse. So you could have a young person who is a victim and or perpetrator of domestic abuse, sexual exploitation, and under the MCA be considered to be exercising their right to make an unwise decision. It's quite a lot to leave on the shoulders of practitioners to navigate their way through that mire, isn't it? It's almost like the system wasn't designed with systems thinking at its heart. So really complex stuff. And thinking again, not just about the boundary between children and adults, but the boundary between safeguarding and community safety and law enforcement. This is a really stark slide, I think. It's taken from the Office of National Statistics, and it looks at knife-related homicides for 10 years up to 2017. This red line here, which spikes in 2017, 71 souls who lost their lives to knives. That red line represents males aged 18 to 24. Now, we say safeguarding is everybody's business. Those lads, and they were lads, nobody's business. They're not children's services business because they're over 18. They're not adult services business because they don't have care and support needs with a capital C and a capital S. They're our citizens. Our people are dying because we aren't prepared to adapt and innovate and redesign the system. Except we are prepared. In rooms like this all over the country, people are chomping at the bit to redesign the system. Out of interest, the group there underneath it, the 54, so again, a spike there, that's males 25 to 34, and beneath that, males 35 to 44. But yeah, tell me again why we need to keep focusing on youth knife crime and not male knife crime. Talk about overemphasis, oversteering. And don't get me wrong, one kid's too many. But can we just think critically about our 18 to 25-year-olds and what's in place for them? Because very little is actually in place for them. And the interface between safeguarding and criminal justice is stark for those young adults. This is from the Justice Select Committee inquiry in 2016. They looked at 18 to 25-year-olds in the custody population. And this is what they identify. In the general population of 18 to 25-year-olds, 2 to 4% of us are thought to have a learning disability. Of the people we've locked up to a third are believed to have a learning disability. Communications impairment, from 5 to 7% of 18 to 25-year-olds in the general population, could be as high as 90% of those we've incarcerated. ADHD, autism, head injury is a really big one actually, head injury involving loss of consciousness in particular, really, really key issue. What's particularly kind of heart-rending, two things really to my mind. One, so many of those young people, they're largely young men, you'll be unsurprised to know, they didn't have their needs identified until we'd imprisoned them. We knew them. Of course we knew them. We knew them in their schools, we knew them in their children's centres when we had them, we knew their mums and dads, some of us might have known their nans. You know, their Senkos knew them, their learning mentors knew them, the football coaches knew them, the yacht definitely knew them. You know, we know these kids. And yet we didn't actually identify their needs, perhaps because their physical presenting behaviour eclipsed our judgment so dramatically. And I find that heartbreaking. And I also think a lot about how much talent and skill there is in the adult safeguarding sector, and yet our adult social workers very, very rarely get invited into prisons. So we're missing the chance for those citizens to access that talent and support. There's a quote here from the Transition to Adulthood Alliance stating what you will absolutely know intuitively, that young adults involved in the criminal justice system are often themselves victims of crime. They've often experienced abuse, bereavement's a really big theme, neglect, trauma in the home. They are the same kids we're worried about who overnight become the adult criminals we seek to protect ourselves from, because we haven't got that lifespan perspective, you know? So that's what we're trying to disrupt here in the kind of redesigning of the system, to take that biographical, whole person, lifespan understanding, because that's how we change communities intergenerationally. Now, said attachment matters. One of you picked up on this actually a little bit in one of your bits of feedback there. We don't talk about attachment very much in adolescence, and I think we probably need to. So in early years, we are absolutely obsessed with attachment. We love a bit of attachment. We think it's a thing to assess between mum and her toddler. Actually, attachment just means relationships. We all have relationships, therefore we all have attachment issues. But we wouldn't want it written down on our case file, would we? But we write it a lot on kids' case files. It's interesting that we don't talk about adolescent attachment, because attachment is a really big deal in adolescence. It's a big deal because attachment security for teenagers does the same thing it does for littlies, secure base to foster exploration and encourage development. But it's also important because when teenagers describe their drivers for some of the harms that we're most challenged by, they use attachment lens language. They don't say, my drivers can be viewed through an attachment lens. They say things like, I thought it was my boyfriend. They're my crew. They're my people, you're not. I don't even know you, I belong with them. They keep me safe, you can't. I thought he loved me, I love him. They use attachment language to describe some of the risky behaviours or risky choices, as we like to call them. And so we need to think about attachment and how we address those things. We all need crew. So thinking about attachment is a really, really important part of this, and drawing on some of the talent in this room to think about that more critically would be very helpful. Not just attachment, though, and I should say actually on attachment, we also mean attachment with peers, because kids' mates really, really, really matter to them. Some of you might have started your day being told by a teenager you love that you know nothing and only their friends understand them. Fun times. That is very, very true for those teenagers. There's that film, that Stephen King film, Stand By Me, and the first line is something like, you've never had friends like the ones you had when you were 12. The evidence really backs that up. As you emerge into kind of 11, 12-ish, your friends start to take on huge salience for you. And so we must absolutely hold on to our group work skills in the sector. It's so important that we can work with whole groups and through peer groups. So, not just attachment, also the adolescent brain. This is not a real adolescent brain. Now, be a bit careful with the neuroscience. The neuroscience has been a bit seductive to us over the years. You might be familiar with things like, the Bruce Perry brain scan image. Yes, I can see some colleagues wincing. Me too, me too. So there's a very famous picture of a healthy brain with all that green light around it. No one's brain has green light around it, incidentally. And then the unhealthy brain, the neglected child with the very small skull and the small brain and the no green light around it. And Bruce Perry himself, a very experienced psychiatrist who did the study, has publicly begged us to stop using that image in training. It is not a child whose mum didn't feed them organic carrots and forgot the nursery rhymes. It is an adult male in an institution who has experienced global neglect. He has written publicly asking us to stop using that image. And we keep popping it in foster carer training left, right and centre. Can we just stop? You sometimes hear language based on a misunderstanding of the neuroscience, like they get hardwired wrong after the early years. Nope, there's no hardwiring in the brain. They get irreparably damaged after the first 1,001 days. Whoa! They're not getting irreparably damaged. There is a real opportunity to do magical stuff in the early years because their brains are so porous and squishy and they're learning little sponges. But you get another period of brain plasticity in adolescence. Great. I guess, everything to play for. No child left behind. If you're looking at your teenage son thinking his brain has turned to mush, you are factually correct. everything to play for. So please don't let yourself fall into that very reductive, simplistic, quite fatalistic interpretation of the neuroscience. Go steady. If you want to get a bit critical about the neuroscience, there's some lovely work by people like Professor Sue White at Sheffield, who's done papers called things like the luster of neuroscience, how brain scans seduced us and things like that. And she's absolutely right. We found it seductive because it looked nice and simple and we ran too fast with it. However, there is some really good messages from neuroscience that can really help us understand the kid behind the behaviour. Two examples which really speak to the point you made, actually. Limbic function. The limbic system is what we use to make decisions. We all think that our limbic system is terribly, terribly rational, and we only do sensible things based on science. Rubbish. The teenager's limbic system, some researchers think, gets very primitive, lots of gut reaction stuff. And think about what might be underpinning that inexplicable, impulsive behaviour. It can help us advocate for the kid. I don't know why I got in the car with them. I was scared. Yeah, it does look like I'm laughing on the CCTV. Yeah, no, I do actually get my boobs out, I suppose. Yeah, no, I do take the can of beer out of his hand before he offers it to me. I don't know why I did it. Just did. Just did. I haven't got an explanation. I just did, Your Honour. You know? It can help us think critically about what might sit behind this inexplicable behaviour rather than just calling it risky behaviour. Another really good example is around dopamine release to the subcortical reward centre. Any neuroscientists in? Cool, because I'm going to really oversimplify this because I'm not a neuroscientist. So dopamine, we're told, is the happy hormone. If you do exercise, apparently, you can increase your dopamine levels. If you eat chocolate, like fancy chocolate, you can't just shove a wagon wheel in. You've got to go for that, like 70% over-the-counter fancy chocolate. Apparently, that will increase your I'm sure public health colleagues, in a measured, proportionate way, that chocolate would increase your dopamine. We've got, I don't know, half a microgram between us, and that's only because there was free coffee and biscuits this morning, and it's Friday, innit? Teenagers are awash with the stuff. Some researchers think there's huge peaks of dopamine in the adolescent brain. And some researchers think there's a connection between these big spikes of dopamine and the really thrill-seeking behaviours that we see from kids. When I was engaging with that, when I was reading that kind of stuff, I thought of a lad I used to know called Stevie. And his favourite thing was twocking, taking without owner's consent, cars being nicked, basically. And he used to love driving them the wrong way down a dual carriageway. Yeah, I know. It still makes me kind of shivery now, 20 years later. And he once said to me, I wanted to feel alive. I mean, the irony, eh? Now, of course, I did what any mediocre, and I was a pretty mediocre practitioner, I did what any middle-of-the-road practitioner would do. I stopped him going on the go-karting trip, because he'd been so naughty and scary and made us all worry about him. You can come and sit with me and do another worksheet on dangerous driving, thank you, Stevie, because that'll really speak to your dopamine receptors, won't it? Well played, Des. But we do a lot of that. We do an awful lot of trying to contain and react to what we think is risk-taking behaviour without thinking, hang on, if this kid needs to engage with the thrill of their own mortality, can I make them a better offer? Think about your colleague's reference there to the Glasgow colleague. Can we make them a better offer that speaks to their needs? Well, some of you might have had the privilege of working with young people in previous years where you were allowed to take them up a mountain in the rain, and they carried their own tents, proper tents with metal poles. Happier, simpler times. There's a good evidence base for that. Kids do need to engage with a bit of measured risk. Just like toddlers need to fall on their bums to learn to walk, teenagers do need to feel that thrill. And we need to think about making better offer, because if we don't, someone out there is definitely going to. So thinking critically about that. And of course, young people, bridging that divide between research expertise and people's lived experience, they've known this for years. I wonder if you could recognise any of Torbay's young people's voices in this. So Max was chairing a conference with me, and he told a room full of social workers he'd been taken into care when he was 3 months old. And he said, I was in care all my life. He was thanking them. Thank you for keeping me safe. You did a really good job of protecting me. You wrapped me up really tight in bubble wrap. But I'm 19 now, and I feel like I can't move my arms. It's such a profound statement. We did a really good job of protecting Max. We did absolutely nothing to prepare him. He will be in contact, and is in fact in contact with adult services. He hasn't got the language of, risk enablement, rights-based safeguarding. He doesn't know what planet he's on, because we didn't prepare him. We didn't have that lifespan approach. Kelly, a young woman who's being supported by a service up in the far north of the country, she described to her worker who had passed on the information when we were gathering data for this, couldn't wait to get to 18, Thought that when I was an adult, it'd all be great. It's not turned out like that, because it doesn't, does it? Wish I was a kid again so you could lock me up. Now, I know that sometimes we have to secure young people because we've run out of options. I understand that. But I would suggest that when a young adult equates safety with being imprisoned, we've got the safeguarding bit wrong. We haven't done that community-level containment that you guys have talked about. And Aisha, glorious Aisha, who I'm going to have to edit what she said because she was very sweary in her interview. And she talked about, she gets very lonely. She said, I get very lonely because I've been in care most of my life, and she understands that her loneliness is part of that. If she was a 78-year-old, we'd be all over her loneliness as a safeguarding issue because we're increasingly good at that on the adults' planet. As a young adult, we're often missing loneliness as a safeguarding issue. Aisha knows it's a safeguarding issue. I asked her if she got transition support, and she was like, yeah, they gave me cookery lessons. My mum's Jamaican, it's such a piss take. The one thing I didn't need was cookery lessons. I said, oh, what did you need then? She knows exactly what she needs. She said, what I needed, and I'm going to edit this, what I needed was some help to help me spot a Wally before I'm already spending time with him. She knows what she needs. She knows that she's lonely because of her care experience. She knows that her loneliness can mean that she's vulnerable to becoming ensnared with men who are not okay for her safety. She knows that if we could intervene and help her spot those men and think about her needs, she could keep herself safer. And she also knows that until we're worried about her kid, she won't see us again. And she's got us banged to rights, hasn't she? What an inhumane system we've accidentally allowed to flourish. You know? We know this. We can change this. Through commissioning, through local strategies, through collectives like yours, we can disrupt and change this, and we will, of course. Just briefly on ACEs, because working with people like Aisha, the tendencies often think, let's do a checklist, and then we'd know that she was medium risk, and we could... It's not like that. The ACEs agenda is very helpful, adverse childhood experiences. I'm sure you've heard of it. It's based on some very, very interesting research in the 90s that showed things like particular types of child maltreatment can lead to poor adult health outcomes. As a commissioner, that's great to have. You know, if you get a spike in neglect here, you might get a spike in diabetes there. Useful to know at a population level. Never, ever, ever intended to be turned into individualised checklists. The most popular checklist, the ACEs 10, has 10 adversities that we tick and score. Do you know what's not on that list? Bereavement. Wow, right? Hunger, homelessness, poverty, structural racism. I mean, all the stuff that you know is a factor, but that checklist doesn't let you exercise your knowledge. There's other things around how we, you know, my parents' divorce was one of the best things that ever happened to me. Yours might have been awful, but we still just get 1 point on our checklist. And you know, as skilled professionals, that's not how the world works. So there's some stuff like that. And there's also, again, an ethical issue. Well, Ms. Morell, I'm afraid we're scoring your son 8 out of 10. Got no services to refer him to. Just thought you might need to know. I mean, what are we doing here? Where's our ethics? Where's our critical thinking? You know? So just pause. Not at all suggesting that we don't need to become more adversity aware. There's some really important work to build our sense of trauma-informed practice, but be a bit careful. The checklist is not the prize. It's the awareness and the practice that we're aiming for. And there's a link there to my second favourite select committee inquiry, which was on early intervention, where there's some really interesting measured challenges around the ACEs, the application of the ACEs research in our field. The research is very helpful. It's our application that we need to think a bit more deeply about. So, in Torbay, if I was a young person in Torbay, how many people would be in my life if I had issues with my attendance, my attainment, my self-esteem, my mum's parenting capacity, my substance misuse issues, and my self-harm? Is there a chance that I might be seeing one of you for each of those issues? That would be quite usual. We do a lot of that in this country, don't we? So who's crazy about me? Who knows the very bones of me? Who can tell my story with me and alongside me?
Those great youth workers.
Yeah, well, possibly, but yeah, 4 of them. But let's think critically about that. To what extent do these youth workers know about my educational attainment? When was the last time we invited them into school? To what extent do these youth workers know about my dad's mental health if I haven't told them? If we haven't let them in? Because the point is not that individual people have to know it all, but we have to create systems where there's proper, meaningful, narrative information sharing. Multi-agency working is a state of mind, not a meeting we go to every third Thursday, you know? And sometimes we've created systems that fragment your expertise rather than bringing something together which is greater than the sum of its parts. And that might be something you could disrupt really usefully in Torbay to create that much more holistic, whole person, whole place approach. Hiya.
Those sort of professionals meetings can also leave people out, like people who are part of the family, etc., etc. That's something I've been seeing recently. You know,
Yes. Professionals meetings can, as the name suggests, be by and for professionals, and we can lose sight of the intended purpose. There's family group decision-making models might be more useful. You might have spotted recently a research study that said most family group conferencing hasn't got strong enough evidence. I would personally suggest that family group decision-making approaches are important to do because they're an entitlement irrespective of whether there is a gold standard model that we could all adhere to. So thinking about how families are given that expertise and invited in, and of course never falling into the trap of thinking if we write our notes in Comic Sans, we've done participative working. So when we don't properly know a young person, we don't allow our professionals to kind of act like little honeybees, sharing your knowledge and your skills across the whole system, we miss people's vulnerability. We miss the fact that these factors are interacting in complex ways. It means that behaviour and choice can eclipse everything else, just as you were highlighting. We're much more likely then to rely on really simplistic checklists and stuff which can actually undermine our professional judgment. So we've got to give people time. Now, there's a tension here because I know that you're all so busy, and some of you might be thinking, I only get 25 minutes with him every 28 days, and I understand that. I suppose what I would reflect back is GPs, our GPs, general practice, they get an average of 7 minutes with us. But I bet you could tell me the difference in experience between a GP who made you feel respected and heard and a GP who didn't. So no matter how little time you've got with a young person, we absolutely can work in a more relational way, even within the constraints that I know you guys face. Now, that's not to dismiss the time pressures you face, but just to kind of give a bit of hope. We can do it even with a few minutes, because we experience it ourselves. So you are really good at this because of the roles you do, but we might do more to help senior leaders, political leaders and policymakers understand it. Young people's risk-taking, which is a dreadful term, of course, because it implies the young person is completely in charge of all their choices. And we know that's not always true. I think risk-taking is this season's lifestyle choices. We've just sanitised it slightly. The intent is still the same. Hold the young person responsible, locate responsibility with them. It's complex. There's interacting biological, social, attachment-oriented, environmental factors, all messing around with each other in a complex way. Some risk can be positive. You've got youth workers. You know this. Some risk is positive. We do have to engage with risk to develop. It's an important evolutionary function. If we never engage with any risk, we'd all still be living with our parents at the age of 40, like Londoners. It would be tragic. Some risks are ego-syntonic. That is a fancy way of saying that some risks, they meet my worldview, my values base, my understanding. So I'm smoking really high-grade skunk at the moment. I'm not obviously smoking really high-grade skunk at the moment. I'm smoking really high-grade skunk because it's the only thing I've found that makes me feel less anxious. And yet, if I'm not lucky, I might have workers who only ever talk to me about the dangers of cannabinoids and never talk to me about anxiety because we've been distracted by the presenting risk, not thought about what need it might be meeting. Again, picking up on my colleague's point there about the Glasgow talk, some of the things that we call rational choices putting yourself at risk are actually kids meeting their unmet needs, in surprisingly rational ways. Say again?
Using all paracetamol.
Yeah, yes, that's okay. Yeah, we do a lot of it ourselves, don't we? So sometimes we might be using the word choice really inappropriately, and you can challenge this, and I hope you do already challenge this in your local system. We can call it a choice when it's a young person adapting to earlier harm. A good example might be living with domestic violence can give us a sense of hypervigilance. We think the world's really dangerous, because it is. And some research, by the Early Intervention Foundation in particular I'm thinking of, they drew a conceptual link between young men who've developed that sense of hypervigilance due to family violence and their vulnerability to being recruited by gangs for their perceived protective benefit. My world's dead scary. Those fellas look nails hard. I'm better off with them than not. Exactly rational, as you say. A really rational, solid theory of change. Not quite the same as chooses to consult with negative offending peers, but that is what we're writing down still sometimes. sometimes we call it a choice when it's a maladaptation to earlier harm. So, a good example might be if a young person experiences sexual harm at the hands of someone in a caring role. One of the things that we might do, according to betrayal trauma theory, we have to kind of accommodate it. We move our goalposts on what constitutes a loving relationship to accommodate those harmful behaviours. Well, sure enough, you can imagine that by the time I'm having intimate relations of my own, that distorted perspective on what a loving relationship is makes me more vulnerable to perpetrator strategies, which is not quite the same as makes risky choices. But that is still what we're writing down. And sometimes what we call a choice is a young person doing their damnedest to meet their unmet needs in whatever way they know how, because they are resourceful. So if I am a young person who has grown up with, for example, prolonged neglect, one of the things that might happen, according to people who work in attachment theory, for example, is I might develop an internal working model, like a little script in my head that says, I'm disgusting, I'm worthless, I'm unloved, I'm unlovable. That's the kicker, I'm unlovable. And I hold that worldview of myself, and I might do all sorts of things that kind of make professionals and other adults reject me. I behave appallingly, you know, I might lie, do these kinds of things, because then I can prove my internal working model right. Because often we do then reject them. Move placements, move schools, get excluded, get shunned. So we kind of collude with that worldview. And then when your man rocks up at my school or college gates in a really tidy set of wheels, decent speakers, drop-down chassis with a blue light underneath it. And don't pretend I'm the only woman in this room to have my head turned. Most of us would have had our head turned by that, actually, because service users are no different to other humans on account of being humans, remember. And he rocks up and tells me, I'm not disgusting and worthless. In fact, I'm definitely not unlovable. I'm amazing. I'm smoking hot. I'm gorgeous. In fact, can he bring his mates next time? And can they film it? And can I look after this package for him because he doesn't trust anyone else the way he trusts me? Who's crazy about me? Because it really, really feels like he might be. And when someone who actually cares about me, like you, wants to try and say that I've been groomed, I'm going to be somewhat of an imperfect victim, I suspect. I'm going to be quite angry. I might come across as hostile. I definitely might display failure to engage. You know? We've got to think. Thinking carefully about what might underpin a young person's risky choice and behaviour. Because what I saw, and you might see this in your own work, written down from just a couple of years ago, not very long ago, someone had written, chooses to return to her abusive partner despite the best efforts of professionals. We have to be really, really vigilant to that stuff. Choice is a dangerous word used wrong. And especially, given that we like to have our cake and eat it when it comes to adolescent choice. You can't possibly vote because your brain is not full-formed enough and you wouldn't understand the complex choices. You can, however, be held criminally responsible at the age of 10. Ooh, neat trick to pull off. You can't possibly be understanding climate change. You're just striking from school, you stupid young fools. You don't understand the true issues. Get back in class. Oh, but we'll send you to war at 17. Oh, but you also can't watch Terminator 3, the full cut, because the guns might scare you. What? What are we doing? You know, we are having our cake and eating when it comes to adolescent choice and capacity. You guys can be activists in this space, not just providers and professionals. And watch yourself for tipping from rescue mentality, which in itself isn't always that helpful, into reform. We like to reform our older victims. We focus on kind of addressing their errant behaviour, not seeing their vulnerability. You know, if what's a good example? If think again about some of the peer-on-peer sexual harm that our young people report and face and how we respond to it. We often remove victims from their schools or colleges, leave the risk intact, send the message to the victim that they've done something wrong and they really shouldn't have told us, because then they'd still be in college with their mates. If I get my car nicked, now you know I don't drive, but imagine I had a car and I got it nicked. And victim support sent me to a workshop with other car theft victims to watch a video about a person who gets their car nicked and fill in a worksheet on better choices we could make in future so we don't get our cars nicked. Why do we do that with some forms of sexual offences? What are we teaching young people about their victimhood being honoured? If a 9-year-old boy told you that he'd been kidnapped, threatened with torture, made to sell drugs and guns and cars in a far-flung part of the country, you best believe you'd rescue. But I couldn't stop you if I tried. There'd be a stampede. 17-year-old boy tells us the same. Fingers crossed he gets a child protection response and not a criminal justice response. Fingers crossed your local constabulary really understand county lines. 18 years and 1 day, all bets are off. You feel the seesaw tip. You've got to stay really alert to that in our practice and in our leadership. So there is all sorts of stuff going on in the system where we have already done good boundary spanning. Special educational needs and disabilities, whilst not a long way from perfect, we will never go back to walking away from disabled kids at 18. Wouldn't dream of it. We've done some really hard graft to create transitional processes there. Mental health, 0 to 25 services, or indeed lifespan services. Hard-won learning, we can apply it in our work here. We can think a lot more about how other parts of the system are already doing boundary spanning, and we can disrupt the idea that safeguardings retain this very old-fashioned binary notion of childhood and adulthood. Let's learn from the other parts of the system that have already done some fluid working. We could draw down the best of adult safeguarding practice into our work with teenagers. Rights-based, person-centred, making safeguarding personal, as the agenda is, would beautifully suit some of our young adults. It's heavy on resilience and also that well-being focus, because what use is it making young people safe if it only makes them miserable? Let's think critically. We could draw up the best of our children's safeguarding practice into our work with adults and young adults. Contextual safeguarding for adults is a great example. I was in Calderdale recently talking to adults people about contextual safeguarding, Carleen Furman's work, and they had this kind of moment of, oh my God, we're doing a safeguarding adult review on 5 homeless men, and we've forgotten to invite the supermarket where they lived in the doorway of, and we forgot to invite the fast food outlet where they'd both been arrested. I mean, that sort of place-based expansive thinking. So there's a kind of import-export job to do across children's and adult services where we nick the best of each other's ideas and practices. There's a real role for the voluntary and community sector in offering that kind of fluid place-based approach. And here's the bit that we've got to just do on our own. We've got to interrogate whether what we're doing has inadvertent side effects. In health, there's a word, iatrogenic, for when the medicine makes you poorly, or like the condition exacerbates, the treatment exacerbates your condition. I think we might need a word like iatrogenic in safeguarding, because some of what we're doing is accidentally, inadvertently, making some of this stuff a bit worse. Secure placements could be a good example of that, where I know they have to be used sometimes. You know, if you send me to Snowdonia and you spend an absolute fortune on my care and placement, and you attend to my physical security, but not my relational or psychological security, I'm drawing a triangle because Lucy Shuker, who came up with this concept, talks about these 3 sides of security. My physical security is grand, because I'm behind a locked door, but my psychological and relational security, not so much. And as I approach 17, 18, someone in the adult social care department of the council will quite rightly take one look at the bill and say, hang on, Des has got capacity, yeah? Bring her back to Paignton, please. And then what work has been done with me to help prepare me for life in my community? So thinking about the inadvertent side effects here. And absolutely building in a bit of system design stuff. We need some geeks back in the system. We lost too many of them. I'm not going to dwell on this except just to show you, because I didn't know how much you would know about adult safeguarding, these 6 principles underpin all statutory adult safeguarding work. Loads of words we can recognise there, like accountability and protection, and some new exciting words that might be interesting to play with in our work with adolescents, like empowerment and proportionality. Might be quite interesting to think, particularly as commissioners, how we could use existing legal frameworks to support our voluntary sector providers operate in that blurred boundary space safely and with great care, but think about how we can span that particularly tricky boundary. And on the home straight now, folks, and this is absolutely your turf anyway, so I won't dwell on it, resilience. Resilience is not code for cuts, and just needs saying, and resilience is not a gene, and it's not an innate character trait. Resilience, I like the Pooley and Cohen definition, resilience is about what you've got in you and what you've got around you, and using both internal and external resources to overcome adversity. Paramount to resilience is relationships. People like you, engaged in the act of love that you are engaged in, is one of the vehicle by which we can enable resilience. And one of the really commonly associated factors with resilience is self-efficacy. Not self-esteem, which we all need a bit of as well, thinking we're good and sound, but self-efficacy, thinking we're a bit in charge. It's quite an old concept, 70s, Bandura. Self-efficacy, having at least one hand on the steering wheel of life, you know, a bit of power, a bit of control. Now, we could do a huge amount in our practice to increase and improve self-efficacy. We won't do it with Comic Sans leaflets. We'll do it by meaningfully sharing power and giving voice and choice to the young people and young adults we serve. And we must, not only because it's the right thing to do, and it's what you know best, of course, but because it's enshrined in law. The United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child tells us very clearly a child's right to protection and participation, mutually dependent and indivisible. We aren't doing one without the other. Again, commissioners, I invite you to think about, are we commissioning highly participative creative services and not letting them do anything close to child protection work? And are we asking our, statutory child protection services to operate in a way which is not at all participative? We can blur that boundary and make it much more coterminous and aligned. Both and, not either or. Because when we deny people self-efficacy, when we do to them, which I know you wouldn't do because of your professional values, but sometimes the system can drive us to, something really scary happens. We actually mirror the very same abusive dynamics that we went in there to disrupt. This is some quotes taken from Camille Warrington and Helen Beckett's work. They're both at University of Bedfordshire. I was basically a puppet. When they wanted me, I had to go, and when they didn't want me, I heard nothing. It's taken from some work that Helen and Camille did looking at young people's experience of the prosecution journey when they'd experienced sexual abuse. There's a really powerful report as well called Journey to Justice by Bernardo's, where young people, there's a quote where a young person said, yeah, the abuse was bad, the trial was worse. And very often those trials don't happen until the young person is over 18, and we've all backed off. So just thinking about, we never intended to replicate those dynamics. In this case, they're talking about the police, but to be fair, could be talking about any one of us in this room. When they wanted me, I turned up. And when they didn't, I was nothing to them. We've all been a bit guilty of that sometimes in the way our services operate. And this second quote here, workers expect you to tell them everything about your life, but they tell you nothing about theirs. That's how the men work too. They find out everything about you and you never even get their real name. We are, if we're not careful, if we don't do good critical thinking, good reflective practice, good supervision and peer support, we can fall into accidentally mimicking the same kind of coercive, exploitative dynamic. Does that make sense? Tell me everything about your life. Get to know me. Trust me, trust me, trust me. Come on, I'm going to meet you all the time. I'm going to pick you up. I'll buy you a little pencil case. I'll get you some lunch. I'm going to go to McDonald's. Come on, I'll learn everything about you. And then one day I just won't. For some arbitrary reason, like I changed jobs. Fair enough. We're going to. Or you moved postcodes, or we went to a locality model, or the service has only been commissioned at 17.5, or we rescored you and actually you're only a 14 out of 20 on the risk register and I only work with the red kids, not the amber kids. Meaningless, arbitrary reasons to sever a relationship. But what have I taught you there about the value of your identity and your story? So it's accidental, we know it's accidental, but we can be tougher on this. And as a collective, you've got enormous power, I think, to really disrupt that approach in the way we work with young people. You are activists as much as professionals. This is just a brief slide to show you that the consequences of exploitation, in this case sexual exploitation, they map exactly against the benefits of participation. So we don't do participation with the good kids who've settled down. We do participation as a means of healing the kids who have not at all settled down. It's part of the way in which we address trauma. It's not a reward for no longer appearing traumatized. Does that make sense? So thinking hard about whose voices we're not hearing, who's not being given voice and choice. And it's not just kids who need self-efficacy, their parents do too. There's a boundary to span, professionals and families, as you alluded to. We don't always treat parents as partners in their kids' safeguarding. And sometimes it can't be done, but very often in terms of extrafamilial harm, of course they're partners, right? They know their kids better. They love their kids more than we love their kids. Fact, stay humble. Why don't we? Maybe because we are used to treating parents as passive recipients of our intervention. Maybe because we've accidentally absorbed some of that kind of victim-villain stuff. There are goodies and baddies, and if bad stuff happens to your kids, maybe it's because you're a bad parent. Maybe we've accidentally absorbed some of those prejudices. Maybe the whole kind of professional power paradigm, you've got to know best stuff. Maybe that's at play. Structural barriers. I mean, quite basic stuff, actually. Like, if a parent has to choose between buying their 3-year-old lunch or getting the bus to the meeting you've set up, and they choose to feed their youngest, and then we write down they failed to engage, What have we done there in terms of addressing structural inequalities? So lots of things to just think, could we be different? And because there are so many voluntary sector and community-based colleagues in the room, I think together with statutory partners, there is a chance to do something very, very different and very creative, and to imagine a very different relationship in Torbay between the people who deliver support and the people who access support, and to deliberately span that boundary and blur the edges a little bit. Because, at the heart of it, but for the grace of God, any one of our kids could require safeguarding intervention at some point. And if we hold on to that, we can often span that boundary better. So you don't want a service, you want a system, which I think you understand very well. You don't want to think it's only about statutory stuff. Absolutely not. That's the tip of the iceberg. It's all the rest of the system that does the magic, not just statutory safeguarding. The community is part of that system, not a recipient of the system's offer. And just on the community, including schools and colleges, the role of the community, faith groups, open access settings, so far as you have them, schools, is not to refer in concerns, it's to be the safe place and context where therapeutic with a small t work gets done as well. Commissioning is a powerful lever. Have I put enough pressure on commissioners in the room now? Is it all landed? Just saying. And if you're particularly interested in total boundary spanning Brave New World commissioning, where we've got away from KPIs and new public management, do take a look at Toby Lowe up at Northumbria University. There's a nice link there. Toby Lowe's done some work on human learning systems, and he says the role of commissioning is not to buy services. The role of commissioning is to buy capacity for learning and adaptation in any given place. And what I see in this room is enormous capacity for shared learning and adaptation. And I suspect there's quite a high degree of ambition to create a meaningful human learning system across Torbay. And that is absolutely the prize you're after. When you're thinking about people's lived experience, who will of course be part of your system, think critically, think carefully. People with lived experience, hugely important. Lived experience is an important source of knowledge alongside research and data and other forms of stuff. But do not fall into the trap of thinking that people's lived experience is a substitute for a salary or supervision or qualifications or training. Do not fall into the trap, as I'm seeing in some parts of the country, of forcing some poor ex-gang nominal to come and speak at a conference and show us your tattoos and your scars. Mate, he's 35. Why is he not training to be a lawyer? Because we're keeping him as the ex-gang member because it suits our purposes to have him come and share his story. Re-traumatizing. Now, let's think ethically about this. Lived experience is a really powerful force for change and a really useful source of knowledge, but just be a bit careful on how we use it. And please don't fall into the trap of letting your boss think it's a cheaper option. Done well, it's definitely not a cheaper option to use volunteers and survivors of harm as part of your system. I'm not going to talk about money, except if you want to talk about money, because there's only one or two self-identifying bean counters in the room, I will just say briefly, I know it sounds expensive, but what we're doing now is not cheap, And we can talk more in the break if you want to. What I want to focus on with you guys is all the stuff we've talked about is so close to what you already do or indeed want to do. This is not so radical, really. And in Torbay, not at all radical, given the collective action we're seeing in this room. If not now, then when? The platform's already on fire. If not now, then when? When are we going to radically redesign it? When are you going to get to do the job that you came into the job to do? And if not you, then who? You are not yet under some of the same really, really terrifying pressures that some places like parts of London or Greater Manchester are. There is a little bit of space to still be creative and thoughtful and energetic and community-led, and you must seize that opportunity. I've got so much faith in what you're going to be able to do as a collective. Please don't let anyone tell you you've got to sit tight and wait and find out what we're going to do and copy them. Take absolute ownership of your patch. You've absolutely got this. And really importantly, take care of yourselves. The work we do is emotional. If we want resilient, safe kids, we need resilient, safe staff. Someone's got to be absolutely crazy about the worker. I would suggest that supervision is also an act of love, done well. We need to make sure that we're holding each other and containing each other and emotionally supporting each other, not simply passing on the burden of stress and pain to each other in the system. So go on and give your boss a cuddle after today. And I'm going to stop talking at you. Thanks very much. I know there were some questions in between, but do you want to not just ask questions, but do you want to disagree? That's really important. not all research is right for you, so I want to openly invite, not aggressive, but passive heckling. If anything I've said didn't land, that's allowed, as well as perhaps more kind of clarification questions if you need them.
I hate talking into microphones. I'm Mary. I work with children in long-term foster care. This is not meant as a criticism, but rather a challenge, which is that if we are to be working in the transition across children and adult services and utilising the resources that we can get, why is there a research and practice for children and a research and practice for adults?
Oh, well,
and
I'm so glad you asked.
how can we access the resources from the research and practice that we don't sign up to?
So, I'm really glad you asked, like a mole in the room. If everything goes according to plan, next week we're allegedly going to launch our new website, which has one shared front door. Well, don't jinx it, because it's been awful trying to get here. If you've ever built a new website, don't bother. It's horrendous. Now, it is necessary we have two completely distinct offers, because a lot of you imagine what we do on dementia, for example, less relevant to those working youth services, although there is some kinship care stuff that might make it relevant. So they are distinct offers. However, Torbay are members on the children's side. They're not yet members on the adult side, although I am always open to any conversation. There would naturally be a discount if there was joint membership, and every membership gets at least 25 free accounts for voluntary and community sector colleagues. If you think that there are particular adults-focused resources on the blue team that you want and haven't got, because we're a small charity and I'm a crap businesswoman, you can just ask me and I will probably send you the PDF and promise me that you won't just put it on community care or sell it or something. Yeah, fine. So just ask. Right? We're not computers. A more content-driven question. Hi. Oh, hang on. Got a microphone coming.
Thanks. More of a... That's horrible.
I know, sorry.
More of a discussion and an ask, really, than kind of a challenge. It's thinking about what you're saying about us all being activists. So, yeah, I am currently a commissioner, although it's not my job title. I'd just like to point that out. I'm actually lead for children and young people for public health in Torbay.
Yes.
But although I've been in that role doing some commissioning of the 0 to 19 service in Torbay for the last 2 years, prior to that I had 20 years as a provider, mainly in the voluntary sector. So I'm a commissioner by accident, like lots of commissioners. And my concern really is as you become... So there is always the energy for disruption, there's always the creativity, there's also all the burnout, and also, I guess my question is really, yes, I know about human learning systems, I know about that research, but what I'm interested in really is good examples, maybe, anecdotal or evidence-based, that actually enable a kind of a social movement kind of response to the kind of political systems that we currently have, which do tend to drive some of this, because there are 4-year political cycles, whether at local, regional, or national level. And actually within that we have people who are trying to make their careers, they're trying to be re-elected, and all those kind of drivers which are in our system. We can't ignore that. And money tends to follow those initiatives, and it increases silo working. And then we also get kind of attitudes, kind of like the societal pressures you're talking about towards certain sections. So my ask is, sorry, I'll summarise, is how can we create a place where we can have some of those conversations? For me, some of that trauma-informed work is about that system, about having something that's held in a different space. And my last point was really about that lived experience. It's not an others, it's us as well.
Yes.
Because we also are
have
human
lived
beings.
experience. In reverse order, one of the things that's quite challenging even about the idea of lived experience is the idea that we don't also have these experiences. I was at a conference not very long ago where someone was talking about domestic abuse, and they said, and of course, 1 in 4 of our service users will experience domestic abuse. I thought, and 1 in 4 of the conference audience, perhaps, as well. Let's just, stop othering, as you say. In terms of local areas, I think are doing a good job around building social movements. I would really recommend, and I'm going to particularly choose ones where the council have been in the driving seats, because I think they're less usual, frankly. Wigan's The Deal, obviously, a classic, where they really stripped back and redesigned how they were doing adult social care and the whole kind of community offer, really, which, in very simple terms, was basically about saying there's a deal, there is a contract, or there is a compact between us, and if we, the council, are going to promise to do your bins every 2 weeks, you, the public, need to properly do your recycling. Fair's fair. I mean, I'm slightly paraphrasing, but it isn't far off. It's very, very clear, consistent, serve and return, we are in partnership. And there's also some very important stuff around it where they moved to strengths-based working and they trained their adult social workers as ethnographers, which I thought was also speaks to your point about really harnessing lived experience in a more creative way. Ethnographic research is fairly gorgeous on that front. So that was quite a good example. You're obviously quite close to the whole Plymouth Alliance stuff and the Toby Lowe influence there. I really, really like the Camden relational activism stuff. Hashtag relational activism, if you're on Twitter. They have it genuinely is a movement born out of the idea that family group conferencing is a right, not a project, and the idea that we have caused iatrogenic harm to parents whose children have been removed. And so skilling up, training and paying, particularly mothers who've had their children removed, to now lead a movement of change in how they do child protection within the council. It is genuinely tear-jerkingly gorgeous stuff. Relational activism. They've got some films on YouTube and stuff as well, so you can kind of see it in action. I think they're all quite good examples where the council have allowed themselves to get into that activist space. I take your point about politicians. It's tricky, isn't it? There are some nice examples of politicians who've got in amongst it. Joe Caliori in Islington, he was cabinet member for children. Very good example of someone who got operational because he wanted to know much more about extrafamilial harm, gangs, youth violence, and defer to the knowledge of his officers. So if you want me to buddy local politicians up with those who I think are setting a great example, let me know. She says diplomatically, and you're stretching my apolitical facial expression at this point, so I'm going to stop.
This is just more of an idealism, really. Wouldn't it be amazing if your approach
It's not my approach, I don't want
to systems could be transferred across to political systems, to social justice, to education, where this interrelationship with organisations, was just embedded. That sort of thing undoubtedly needs to happen, and
sure.
What a fantastic role model. I shouldn't say model, but system.
The word model is allowed, I just didn't want you to think what I was saying was a
Yeah,
model.
that's what I'm saying.
It's not my approach at all. My organisation synthesises other people's evidence. We try and communicate it in a way which is not quite as boring as maybe reading the paper might have been. But I don't want to claim any credit for all the hard work that much cleverer people than me have done in this. And I think local areas themselves are the ones who are really innovating here. We've seen some fantastic, Bristol have just brought their children safeguarding, adult safeguarding, community safety into one board because they're trying to boundary span strategically. Greenwich have just overnight said that their exploitation services now go up to 25 because it's not that hard sometimes. There are all sorts of examples. Hertfordshire are getting us to do 5 sessions with their practitioners to find out what boundaries need spanning from their point of view, and we're then feeding it back up to Cabinet and strategic leaders at the end of April. So local areas everywhere are doing things to try and disrupt their system. Politics is probably out of my remit. I know, and never apologise for idealism either, I would suggest. It's a good thing. Did anything not feel relevant to Torbay? Did anything feel like, actually, that's not quite how it works for us?
Southwest, and we, in our work, we again follow local authorities, including Torbay. And one of the things, the reason why I'm here is we have identified now services that there's a huge gap in services for transition between adolescent to adulthood for adopted children.
Yeah.
And very interestingly, our children, most of them, although their biological age will say 18, the emotional age will be far, far behind, and we are really struggling because everyone's assumption from every service is even going to GP, they will start talking suddenly to this child who was childless yesterday, suddenly like an adult, but that kind of, adult wouldn't be able to understand, so parents kind of exclude it, and they really struggle to get through this transition, and we really need to find the right services for our
Yes, so there's a few things to unpack there. I can recognise the dilemma. So we absolutely know from things like Sawyer's research that for some young people, the brain is still developing well into our 20s and beyond. So I think we will grow out of this idea that adulthood kicks in at 18. Within our lifetime, we are going to look back and be like, I can't believe we used to put a fence there. It's just indefensible. It will happen. This stuff takes time. Just keep pushing at it. We should be a bit careful of only using biological studies to define capacity, of course. We are more than just our brain functioning. So Moshman's quite good on critiquing that if you're interested. There's a reference in there. I think part of this is about reconceptualising what childhood and adulthood is. We remember, well, you woke up on your 18th birthday. Do you remember how it felt? Remember that feeling you had? It was not a cider and black hangover, madam. It was capacity magically coursing through your veins, wasn't it? You know, we can disrupt this in the conversations we have every single day, routinely, but the solution is not to infantilise all young adults. I mean, good luck calling a 24-year-old a teenager. You know, we're not suggesting that we just prolong childhood for another 7 years. We're talking about creating fluidity from 10 to 24, a more graded approach where we can afford greater agency and capacity to some teenagers and we can afford greater protection and understanding to some adults. It's about blurring the boundary, not just extending the service. That feels really important to be clear on. And I also think that we should probably be a bit careful about even thinking services are the solution. Services, as soon as you say the word service, you're into headcount and workflow and thresholds. And words like service can be quite constraining. Systems and offers, yeah.
That would be the right thing. We are very good, like you said, that we are very good. We learn how to keep these young people safe and protecting them, but we can't teach them. I mean, we missed out the part to build their resilience on our children and how we can do that.
Yes, so I think the participative practice angle is probably where we have most scope to focus on resilience, to really work with and through young people, honouring their self-efficacy, honouring their capacity and their agency, honouring their expertise in our practice and our policies and our strategies. That's probably where we can have the most impact on resilience, I think.
And when our parents are saying that it's my young person, my teenager got controlling behavior, I really want to turn that controlling behavior into positive things. Thinking that this is empowering, this is giving them a chance to say how they feel. And
I think that's right. I cannot commend to you highly enough the work of your colleagues in youth services, for example, and community-based youth organisations. They live and breathe this idea of empowering young people and recognising the child behind the behaviour and making a strength of what we might call, disobedience. So I would really encourage you. Do you say you're working for Adult Southwest? Adopt Southwest. Find your youth workers to draw them in. Pru workers, you've got some good ones. There are people who absolutely understand this and could be a real source of support, I think, in planning there. A colleague here who wants to...
Hi, my name's Ed Williams. I'm coming from I've got youth in my job title, which is brilliant. I absolutely love that. So I'm a youth homeless prevention officer. So I do sit in a really interesting position across different multi-agency teams where we've got sort of like the Adults Community Safety, so it's, and as well as there being an integrated children's multidisciplinary team where I physically sit. And work.
You are boundary spanning personified, sir.
Yes, so and I think it's really interesting. We've actually got an awful lot of boundaries that needed to come down in order to do that, and I think it was very descriptive in the evolution of evidence. So, our evidences have evolved over the since 2009, and so I have an interesting insight is the fact that the Homeless Reduction Act, which is what governs our housing decisions, was thrown onto our laps with no time to pick it up. It was literally, this is the way it is now. And we've had to spend, the past year, in nearly 2 years, making that work with the Children's Act. And it's felt a little bit like being a multi-grain silo that sat on the ground empty with some silos around it. And there's been some very interesting transition work that's been done through that, because although we pick them up before they're 18 years old, we don't drop them when they turn 18. We have to continue, their priority needs are there because they were under 18. Yes. And we have to look at that whole picture. We are, as a housing officer, we are cradle to grave by very virtue and nature of that role. But then we've got them constraints that sit around, what acts are involved, and I think as a local authority we actually become very good over the past 12 to 18 months at doing them transition works for children facing homelessness, along with all of the other needs that we have to assess as a part of our process because of the Homeless
So
Reduction
you'll have
Act opening
loads
it up.
really useful and applicable and transferable learning about boundary spanning and boundary blurring that, if I can remember my local government days well, no one's written down because you've been too busy doing the work. It might be really important to just try and capture what happened, how did we get there, what surprised us, what did we learn, what mistakes did we make, because it's invaluable in other parts of the system, and we very, very rarely, because we're doing work, not being researchers, we very rarely write it down and try and codify it, and then we lose that kind of learning over time. And I just wonder whether there's an opportunity to try and distill it in some way for other parts of the system. And I also think your point about what you'll have learned going through it links to the point about politicians. Is there an opportunity locally to tell the story to your local politicians about how siloed and boundaried the work can be and how much more you can achieve when you have flexibility and fluidity? Because those local politicians, through various means and mechanisms, can start to tell your story nationally. It's probably beyond any of our gifts to redesign national government. So your local politicians are a really powerful lever for change. But we have to tell them the right stories. If we keep saying, look, we've got a magical service and it's working and it's great, let's tell them about the stuff we've done to innovate and how they can advocate for us. It'd be really nice if scrutiny, for example, wasn't just about scrutiny, but was also about scrutinising what's wrong in the system, not just what's going well in service. So stuff like that, which might be quite transformative. I've got my yacht sister here. Hi.
I'm going to take some credit because I manage Ed.
Oh, job well done, job well done.
So we are an integrated youth support service and youth offending team, sits in there and various other. I think from a yacht perspective, it's always at a crisis, isn't it? It really is at a crisis when we're a multidisciplinary team. We have all those services within our agency. People know that, they know, and it's really tragic that it has to come to a point where a young person offends in order for those services to kick in. And I have heard it, and not so much recently, I must say, but I've heard it. I've been doing this job for 13 years in Torbay. Well, they need to get to that point where they get to the yacht. They need to go to custody. And they'll only learn their lesson when they go to custody. And I haven't heard that for a long time because we are getting much better at understanding each other's services. But for us, I think within the youth justice system, it's really hard because the courts aren't keeping up with us and the laws aren't keeping up with us. And we're all working, we're trauma-informed practitioners, and we use a trauma recovery toolkit with our young people because they're all very complex. The courts are starting to recognise that, but we're still working with some quite draconian orders that are imposed on young people that they're expected to keep to, and these are traumatised young people. So we're all moving, I think, quite quickly in Torbay. The system is just so slow, so slow. And it comes back to politicians and your local councillors understanding. And that referring in, I thought, was really interesting because of that thing of, well, we are a multi-agency team, so we want to refer into you. I spend a lot of my time at panels and what have you saying, you really do not want your young person to come into our service. No. Why would you want a young person to even be tainted with youth justice and a youth and youth offending team? The community is a place these young people should be dealt with, and within their schools, because they're 25 hours a day, if they're lucky, unless they're excluded. Yeah. So
I wonder whether the Youth Justice Board might become your ally. Controversial though they be.
No, absolutely.
They are particularly at the moment engaged in some of this stuff and trying to shape how inspections and things happen. And I just wonder whether a local visit might.
I think it's it absolutely, and our remit from the Youth Justice Board is desistance.
Yes.
Absolute desistance. Divert them away. Positive activities, positive aspirations, and we do that quite well. I work with Joe, in terms of Imagine This and getting our young, because we tick people's boxes, because people get funding. It's really cynical sometimes.
Yes, it's really cynical.
Really cynical. Oh, yes, you will get Arts Council funding for creativity because you are a service that is open to that. You don't get money any other way.
And there is a bit of whatever gets you through.
Yeah.
Bit of cynicism, well targeted is no bad thing. I wonder what would happen locally if you were to offer to host a round table looking at the interface between youth justice, the youth court and family justice, and whether Torbay might host that round table, inviting some of your family court and youth court judges to be part of it, and especially if you've got someone national to chair it. That might be a good approach. Is there someone over here? Oh no. Take care.
Des, I was just going to slightly change the tune about us talking about systems and services and how we model our work, and just really focus on something that you said very early on, which is about relationships. And I'll never forget a young person who I worked in Bristol who was probably, you name it, high up on every checklist of every whatever it was that millions of people were doing with her. And she just said to me one day, "Jo, all I want is for someone to know me well enough that if I'm not all right, they'll notice." Mm-hmm. And I think we've got to really try and honour that the sometimes simplest thing, which is having time to talk.
Yes.
And to listen, and however we professionalise that, just to remember that that's a human thing, and that's what all of us do, but we kind of don't talk about that enough, and the importance of that.
I think that's absolutely right. And being able to notice when someone's not all right means you have to properly know them, as this young woman described. But knowing them must not, we must not allow ourselves to tip into that kind of protective, hero stuff. If you think you know a kid best of all, you need to help others get to know them. It's really, really important. And kind of linked to that is there's a young woman who had said in some work that the University of Bedford are doing, where they said, "I hate the way you only think of me as my problem. Like CSE is the lowest thing on my list of stuff I'm worried about, but it's the only reason we know you." And that kind of complete disconnect between how young people, who talked about identity early on, how young people identify and what they think are the big issues in their lives, and then what we think. Oh, he's one of our knife crime lads. No, he's not. He's a Gemini and an Arsenal fan. Both bigger problems, frankly. Being glib there. Really knowing a person means seeing all of them. There's a great bit, it links to relational-based practice in exactly the way you described. Clinton Fakor, who does TLAP stuff, he's a disabled man. He's had experience of using services all his life, and he's now an activist and advocate. And he talks about how relational-based practice for him was when he finally got a social worker who understood that he, in his words, that I'm an Aston Villa fan, a dad and a father, a dad and a husband, and I'm a wheelchair user. In that order of importance, he jokes. And sometimes it's not more complicated than that, seeing the whole person and then being humble enough to know that you are not the saviour. You're just one part of their big system. So yeah, really well made point.
I just want to sort of add to that example, really. It made me think about when I was a probation officer and was working with a young man who, his offence was sexual offence, and I was quite newly qualified, so I wanted to get it all right. So there was certain things I had to do. And I can remember he sat there and he just turned to me at one point and said, "Would I be able to get any opportunity to talk to you about what happened to me when I was a child?"
Yeah.
And that was a really powerful moment for me in my practice.
Because you
Because
thought
of
you
the
had
system,
other priorities to do, and I've got to tick
and the
these
system was
boxes.
telling me what I had to do.
There's something about it's coming through now. We talk a lot about team around the child, which means that lots of us with all our different issues, and different priorities focus on this one child. And there's a kind of more advanced model, which is about team around the relationship. If the one person I trust is my probation officer, the job of the system is to wrap itself around that relationship. So yeah, you are going to be the person that talks to him about his childhood. You might need cams on speed dial. You might need access to different training. You might need some clinical supervision from someone who actually knows business. But we don't sever that relationship. We think about the value of that relationship. So rather than saying, well, it's a different issue now, it's about such and such. So that's not for you, Jo, that's for a different worker who she doesn't trust and doesn't feel knows. Wrap ourselves around the relationship, not just individualising the child, I think. I think you're going to get lunch in a minute. I mean, that's the competition here. So we can definitely... draw to a close and have some sandwiches. So on the end of this, there's some stuff you can look at. So if you haven't got an account, these are all open access and free. If you find something on the websites that you really want and you haven't got access, let me know. And then maybe, if it's okay, can I drop you a note via Chooks or Joe in a few months' time or 6 months' time? And I'd really like to hear if you're doing anything in this space, what you're up to. I'd particularly like to be able to tell the rest of the country about things that Torbay are doing, because we don't get enough chance to do that, I think, in the southwest, to, a bit of swagger. So if you're up for it, I'd really like to follow up with you and find out what you're up to. Is that okay? Champion, thanks for your time, folks.